Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today we're going to be doing the USFL Week 3 review for the 2023 season. If you know from the power rankings that came out yesterday, you'll know this week was insane, where every single game basically went the opposite way people expected it to create a huge shift in who the best teams and worst teams are. So, without further ado, let's get started by looking at the scores of each game. The Breakers beat the Stallions at Birmingham 45-31 in the rivalry game, and then you had the Showboats lose to the Gamblers at Memphis 30-26. The Maulers ended up beating the Philadelphia Stars at Ford Field 21-13. And in the Michigan Panthers' first home game, they lost to the New Jersey Generals 28-13. All four of these games went the opposite way you expected, and it was definitely insane. So, as for the first game, the Breakers and the Stallions, essentially the easiest way to look at this game is that the time possession battle really was the big deal. This game was essentially close throughout the whole time, except the third quarter. The Breakers got a lead that the Stallions weren't able to come back from. And a big reason for that is the fact that the Breakers held the ball for 13 more minutes. A big reason for this was that the rushing total for the Stallions was a horrid 46 yards, compared to Wes Hills himself on the Breakers having 191, which meant the Breakers were able to hold the ball more. And even though Magoo had another really solid game, he got outplayed by McLeod Bethel Thompson, who ended up having about 6% more completion percentage, 50 more yards passing, a yard better on yards per attempt, one more touchdown, and a 20 better quarterback rating. Essentially, those two things, the rushing and the quarterback play, really were the big driving factors. Essentially, if I'm a fan of either team, I'm very skeptical of their defense. Allowing as many points as they've been allowing in a couple weeks has been kind of questionable. But the Breakers ended up winning this game. They had over 200 more yards than the Stallions. They obliterated them in basically every single statistical category in possession and total yards. Not a surprise the Breakers ended up winning this game, honestly, just because they did thoroughly outplay them. If anything, the score makes this game seem closer than it was. The Breakers were the better team for basically the entire time, and they are definitely the best team in the league. Now, as for the Showboats and Gamblers, this game ended up being another one of those random game of the year type of games, or it was an outstanding game. It was insanely close, and the fourth quarter happened, and it was insane. It started with the Showboats going for the 4th and 12 conversion instead of, the onside kick where they failed. But then despite that, they were able to force the Gamblers to punt the ball, which allowed them to go score a touchdown. And then there was a missed field goal by the Gamblers, which ended up giving the Showboats the lead when they scored their second touchdown of the game. And then it ended when the Gamblers scored a touchdown with like under 10 seconds left, which ended up ending the game for the Gamblers to win. It was an insane fourth quarter in a game that was truly a great one, and I really hope all you guys saw it. It was a fantastic game. Then we have the Maulers versus the Stars. This was one that I think a lot of people, this is probably the most shocking of all of them. The Maulers beat the Stars. Why? Well, turnover battle was the big reason. The Stars had two more turnovers than the Maulers, and the big reason for that is that two of those interceptions were both in the fourth quarter. The Stars could have gotten the lead or at least tied the game in the fourth quarter, but those two interceptions really hurt them. The Maulers themselves, their new kicker ended up going 5 for 5 in field goals while ironically missing an extra point. So he tied the record for most field goals in a USFL game at 5. But their offense could not finish the job. Passing, they only had 67 total yards due to how many times they got sacked and how few yards they had passing. And then running the ball, that was the big difference. The Maulers ran the ball over 100 more yards than the Stars did, while averaging an insane 3.4 more yards per rush. Just averaging 3.4 yards per rush isn't great, but that's okay. But they averaged that more than the Stars did. They averaged 4.4 to the Stars 1.0, which is insane. The Maulers ended up beating them mainly due to those turnovers in the fourth quarter. And this is despite the fact that the Maulers offense could not do anything in the red zone and finish drives. So the Stars ended up losing this game, and the Maulers defense still looks really solid. Then the last game was the Generals versus the Panthers at Ford Field. In front of a great crowd, the Generals got the job done. Despite the fact that they had the ball for over 10 less minutes than the Panthers, the reason they won this is they had two passes by DeAndre Johnson, which were for over 50 yards, and DeAndre Johnson himself had a 71-yard rush as well. So the Generals had three separate 50-yard plays, with two of them being 70-yard plays. When you have deep plays like that and you have more than one of them in a game, you're basically getting a free win because you're getting two free touchdowns. That's why the Generals' yards per play was an obscene 8.8 compared to the Panthers' 4.1. And they both had the same total drives because once you eliminate the drives where they had those huge plays, the Generals really didn't do that much offensively. The Panthers, though, they lost this game due to their quarterback play not being as good as it's been in recent memory. Carson Strong came back in, to show some people that he had, still some fire in him, and then proceeded to burn out that fire in his second drive when he played like trash. Essentially, that Carson Strong came in because Love played bad, and he reminded everyone how good he was in the couple of drives he had in week one, then proceeded to be bad and make everyone realize why Love was a starter. Though Love came back in and didn't do much, and it's definitely up in the air who's going to be the starting quarterback this week. I'm going to be interested to see who that is. Shame the Panthers couldn't get the job done, but when you allow 3 plays of 50-plus yards, you're going to lose the game. So that's basically it for the scores. Now, in terms of the players of the week, Offensive Player of the Week went to West Hills of the Breakers. This was the easiest of all of them. The man had a fumble. That was the only downside to him because he had 3 receptions for 16 yards. And the big reason was that he had 190 yards rushing with a 5.6 average while only having a long of 28. He didn't have a single rush that made you go, oh man, that's an exorbitant total or, inflated like a 70-yard run. No, he averaged 5.6 yards basically every carry. Incredible, easily deserved at 3 touchdowns rushing. Easily the best offensive performance this year aside from maybe Josh Love's week one. Unbelievable. Then Defensive Player of the Week went to Reuben Foster, the former first-round pick in the NFL. Came into this week of the Maulers, and he got the job done. 2 TFLs, he had 2 pass deflections, an interception, led his team in 11 total tackles, and had 5 solo tackles. He was a big reason why the Maulers got the win over the Stars. He had an incredible game. It's great to see somebody, who, had some failed NFL career after such high expectations have a good week. Definitely good to see. And then last is Chris Blewett. This is the Special Teams Player of the Week. Now, Blewett makes sense because even though he went 5-5 in field goals, he kind of blew the extra point he had to where this performance is not as great as Matt Coughlin's, where he actually made his extra point a couple weeks ago. But it still was incredible. The guy just came to the team after Hire Lily and missed a bunch of kicks, and he ended up making a 50-yard field goal. He went 5-for-5 in field goals, and him and Reuben were 2 of the biggest, if not the 2 biggest reasons why they won that game. Incredible to see. Congrats to all those guys for winning Players of the Week. As for the attendance this week, we saw a couple mixed bags. Memphis, this was technically an away game for the Showboats because the Gamblers are, their other team that's at the hub, but it was their home game, so it was technically a Gamblers home game, but naturally the Express are there, so it's just like last year, the Stallions. In terms of attendance, I would say it was what you expected. They basically had the San Antonio Brahmas syndrome from the XFL this year, where they had that great week one of about 20,000 fans, but then, they come back a couple weeks later, they're already 0-2 and look terrible. And instead of having near 20,000, they have about 12 to 13,000. Basically, it looked like they had what they had basically at Memphis Express games. If you go back and watch the Express tape, you'll see that, the fans are a lot less in each section than the Memphis Showboats, but they had fans on both sides, whereas the Showboats only have them at the home side. So you see that's why it looks really different. But yeah, I'd say that the Showboats basically matched what the Express had. It isn't great. It's not terrible. But if this team was better, I would have said that this is bad. But being 0-2 and now 0-3, I'm not going to be shocked if they end up having just middle of the road 10,000-ish attendance per game like the Brahmas had. I wouldn't be shocked. Now, the Birmingham Stallions were the big disappointment. The opening week looked solid. It looked they had, maybe like 12 to 15-ish thousand. Then it was like they had 10,000, but hey, there was a lot of events going on. And now it looked like they had a few thousand being like 5 to 10,000, not 10 to 15,000 kind of few. This was definitely disappointment. This is proof of some bad scheduling. You can't just have every single home game be week after week after week. You got to have some time in between. I think that, especially when you only have 8 teams, you should be able to schedule it to basically every other game is a home or away game, or at the very worst, you should only have back-to-backs, not 3 straight home games. So hopefully whenever, they come back home after their away trip, that they have, more fans here. This was a disappointment. Maybe it was a terrible decision having the game be played so early at 12 p.m., but I don't know. This was definitely a disappointment. You would have liked to have them have at least 10,000, and they didn't have 10,000, that's for sure. They probably had about 7,000, just a bit. They probably had about what the Guardians Vipers had, which is about 6,000 to 9,000. This was definitely a disappointment, the biggest disappointment of the week. But the biggest success of the week was naturally the Michigan Panthers. If you watch all the film and stuff, you almost can't even tell. The away side and the home side both had great crowds. The away side wasn't as great as it only went about halfway up in the 100s versus the home side, which some of the sections went all the way up. This was great. They had 15 to 20,000 people in attendance. It was a great showing by all the fans. Now, hopefully it doesn't drop that much, but I probably will drop a decent amount due to the fact they did lose this game. But they still look pretty decent, and if they're able to win this week, then they should be able to continuously have, 10 to 15,000 at least. So This was definitely a great sight to see. You had a lot of famous people. Calvin Johnson was there. Ben Wallace was there. Not Anthony Carter. Bobby Hebert was there. You had a lot of huge Detroit people there. Big E was there. It was truly a great place to be. It was definitely a great atmosphere. And, aside from Memphis week one, this was the best attendance we've seen from the league. Definitely success. Now, where the real success is in the TV ratings. I've said in both the week one and week two for this review that while one league had a slight edge, the USFL in week one, the XFL in week two, I didn't say neither league really won the attendance. This week is different. The USFL won the attendance this week. This was a massive win for the USFL. They were going against the XFL playoffs, and they clearly did win this. It is clear. For one, the big outlier is the 0.56 million or 560,000 that watched Fox on 4 p.m. in the Generals Panthers game. That was a disappointment, but I'll get to why it's not as bad as people say. The first thing is that the Breaker Stallions was a huge success. I said this was going to be one of their best USA games, and it was. This is the third highest viewed USA game across this year and last year. Only 2 games did better, and that was the week 1 and week 2 games in USA last year. So this doing better than those is a great sign. And then you have the Fox game at 7 p.m. doing 780,000. That was a W. That was a massive win. For those who don't know why that's such a massive win, the reason it's a huge win is that the XFL game that had 680,000 on ESPN had a ton more advantages than the Fox game. So yes, for the USFL advantage, it's on Fox versus ESPN. And while yes, ESPN is basically as close to a broadcast channel that's not broadcast as it still isn't. So ESPN is a worse channel than Fox. That's the one area the USFL succeeded in. The downsides. Number one, or the reason the XFL should have won. The game followed the draft. It literally directly followed the end of the draft. And the people who are watching 6th and 7th round of the NFL draft are the kind of people who will watch spring football, guys who just love football or love their college guys. So those people were brought in directly to a game that is a playoff game in a league like that happened after it. And the fact this was a playoff game. The bottom line is these are playoff games for the XFL. They matter more than the USFL games do by a country mile. So the fact that the USFL beat them by over 100,000 in this game is a great win for the league. The USFL got a great W, especially considering the fact that in terms of the games themselves, the Memphis Showboats versus Gamblers game was just much better than the Arlington Renegades versus Roughnecks and just the game quality. And the fact that it was the Showboats and Gamblers, who were 2 0-2 teams, did this. Basically, everything you look at it's very clear the USFL is taking that as a massive win. Then you have the Pittsburgh Maulers Stars game that was on at 12 o'clock, competing with basically nothing, having 760,000. That's okay. It's at 12 p.m. It's not the greatest time slot. You would have liked it to be a bit higher, but overall, I think that was solid. But then you have the Generals versus Panthers that had 560,000, which competed against the Sea Dragons Defenders. Now, for both these games, and a huge reason why the USFL game is as low as it is that on ABC, another broadcast network, the Warriors and Kings had the highest viewed first-round game in over 24 years. I like to say that, there's always events going on, but this was one of those exceptions. This was a huge deal. Over 10 million people watched that first-round game between the Kings and the Warriors, which went on directly against both these games. So the fact that either of these games even had over 300,000, I think is a success. But again, Fox beat out ESPN 560,000 to 480,000. And the even bigger reason why this is a huge win for the USFL is that they started their game at 4 o'clock versus 3 o'clock. And like I said last week, if you start your game later than the other league, you're asking for failure because people who are choosing to watch a football game are going to put the one that's, on first. And then the other reason is a huge win. The Dragons Defenders was the marquee matchup. Almost nobody cared about the Renegades Roughnecks because we all thought the Roughnecks were going to pwn the Renegades. It was a blowout. It just was the opposite way everyone expected. But the Dragons Defenders, that was the big matchup. And the fact that game didn't even hit 500,000 and the Generals Panthers, which started an hour later, did do better is a huge win for the USFL. So in terms of TV ratings, for the first time in these 3 weeks, one league did win, and that was the USFL. So that'll do it for my overall thoughts on this week and the review itself. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We have at least 3 videos a week coming out during the USFL season. And as always, have a great night.